He was just the janitor, the man with the mop, the man no one really saw. But one cruel joke in front of a classroom full of students changed everything. A teacher, certain of his superiority, handed him a calculus problem meant to humiliate. What happened next silenced the entire school and exposed something far darker than an equation on a board. This isn't just about a math problem. It's about pride, prejudice, and the hidden brilliance no one expected. The question is, are you ready to see the truth? The morning bell at Lincoln High rang like it always did, shrill, sharp, cutting through the chatter of restless teenagers. Sneakers squeaked across the polished floors, lockers banged open and shut, and voices filled the halls in a messy orchestra of routine. Teachers clutched steaming coffee cups. Students hurried half-awake to class. Everything felt normal, ordinary, but there was one man who never blended into that rhythm, though most pretended he wasn't there at all. Marcus Reed. To the students, he was the janitor. To the staff, he was just another employee moving silently in the background. He was the man who emptied trash bins, polished floors, and scrubbed away the stains of their daily lives. His work made the school shine, but his presence went unnoticed. He was everywhere and invisible all at once. What they didn't see was the man behind the uniform. Marcus had grown up in a world where brilliance wasn't enough. Born in a working-class black neighborhood, he carried dreams bigger than the cracked pavement beneath his feet. As a boy, numbers fascinated him. Equations became his puzzles, math his secret language. He had once imagined a future filled with chalkboards and lecture halls, solving problems most people couldn't begin to understand. But life had other plans. His father's illness, the bills that stacked higher than his textbooks, and the crushing weight of responsibility forced Marcus to set aside those dreams. College slipped away, opportunities evaporated, and so, instead of numbers, Marcus carried mops. Instead of solving problems on paper, he solved them in silence, patching leaks, fixing locks, making sure Lincoln High stayed standing. Yet, in the quiet corners of his world, the fire never died. Inside a worn-out notebook, tucked deep in his supply closet, were pages filled with problems copied from borrowed textbooks. Calculus, trigonometry, logic puzzles. Marcus tackled them during lunch breaks, after shifts, in the stillness of late nights. Not for recognition, not for applause, but because his mind demanded it. Because it was the only piece of his old dream he refused to let go. To most, Marcus was just a shadow moving down the hall. But to himself, he was more. Still, invisibility came with a price. Racism at Lincoln High wasn't loud, but it was steady, like a hum beneath the walls. Subtle jokes, dismissive glances, the unspoken belief that Marcus was less because of the color of his skin and the role he played. A few teachers looked down on him openly, making comments sharp enough to sting. Others dismissed him quietly, with silence and avoidance. And then there was Mr. Thompson, arrogant, sharp-tongued, and proud of the authority his advanced calculus class gave him. Thompson carried himself like the keeper of intelligence itself. To him, Marcus was nothing but proof of hierarchy. A man who cleaned up after others. A man who belonged firmly at the bottom. Thompson never missed a chance to remind him of it, sometimes with a smirk, sometimes with words laced in false politeness, always with the sting of superiority. Marcus endured it. He had learned long ago that silence was safer than confrontation, that blending in, shrinking down, was sometimes the only way to survive. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. On the surface, Lincoln High kept moving, just another school day passing like countless before. But beneath that surface, something was shifting. The ordinary was about to crack, because prejudice has a way of testing patience, and arrogance has a way of overstepping. And soon, both would collide in a moment that no one could have predicted. One cruel joke, one piece of chalk, one board filled with numbers, and the man they had all overlooked, the janitor, the shadow, the nobody, would be forced into the spotlight. What happened next would silence laughter, turn whispers into headlines, and prove that brilliance has no uniform. And that prejudice, when exposed, is far uglier than anyone wants to admit. The day it happened didn't look any different at first. The sun filtered through streaked windows, dust motes drifting in the still morning air. Marcus pushed his cart down the hall, his routine steady, almost mechanical. Sweep, empty bins, wipe down the glass. Invisible once more in a place that relied on his hands but ignored his presence, until he reached the door of Mr. Thompson's classroom. Inside, students hunched over notebooks. Chalk screeched across the board as Thompson scrawled a labyrinth of equations only a few could even attempt to follow. His voice carried sharp authority, slicing through the classroom chatter. He paused, glanced at the door, and spotted Marcus sweeping just outside. That smirk, the kind that never meant kindness. Perfect timing, Thompson said loudly, his voice coated with false cheer. Heads turned. A dozen pairs of eyes locked onto Marcus. Phones slid quietly onto desks, ready to record. Thompson tapped the chalk against the massive problem he'd just written, symbols and limits stacked like a wall meant to intimidate. Why don't you give this one a try? The laughter came instantly. Nervous, cruel, a ripple spreading through the room as students waited for the humiliation they thought was coming. To them, this wasn't about math. This was about entertainment. Marcus froze. His broom stilled against the floor. His chest tightened as the meaning sank in. He wasn't being asked to solve anything, he was being set up, turned into a spectacle. He could have walked away. He could have lowered his head, let the moment pass, and returned to silence. That was what Thompson expected. That was what the students waited for. But years of being underestimated, years of brilliance hidden away in notebooks no one ever saw. Something inside Marcus refused to stay silent this time. He leaned his broom against the wall. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped into the classroom. The students chuckled, elbows nudging, eyes wide with anticipation. Thompson extended the chalk like a weapon disguised as a gift. Marcus took it, his hand steady, though his heart pounded. In his chest, the board towered in front of him, filled with lines of intimidating calculus. But to Marcus, it wasn't chaos. It was order waiting to be uncovered. He studied it, eyes narrowing, mind already tracing the pathways, and then he began to write. At first, snickers filled the air. A few whispers, someone muttered, "This is gonna be good." But the laughter began to fade as Marcus's hand moved confidently across the board. Step by step, the problem unraveled. His logic was clean, precise, every mark purposeful. The silence deepened. Students leaned forward in their chairs, phones now recording not a joke, but a revelation. By the halfway point, the tension was thick. Thompson's smirk had vanished, replaced with a tightening jaw. The classroom, once buzzing with amusement, was now trapped in stunned quiet. Marcus reached the final step, boxed the answer, and set the chalk down neatly. He turned, not with a grin, not with arrogance, but with the calm dignity of a man who had carried brilliance in silence for too long. The silence was deafening. Then, whispers erupted. "Wait, did he? He solved it. Yo. He actually did it." Phones buzzed with new notifications. Videos uploaded instantly. The story raced through the school like fire. The janitor had done the impossible. By lunchtime, Marcus's name was on every tongue. Some students applauded him in passing. Others whispered, uncomfortable, realizing they had laughed too quickly, judged too harshly. But beneath the awe was something darker: resentment, because humiliation doesn't just sting the target, it wounds the one who set the trap. And Mr. Thompson's pride had been ripped open in front of his students. The more the video spread, the deeper his anger grew. Marcus felt the shift almost immediately. Teachers glanced at him differently now, not with respect, but with suspicion. Whispers followed him down the halls. He had broken an unspoken rule. He had stepped out of the place others decided he belonged in. And Thompson? He said nothing. Not yet. But his silence carried a weight heavier than words. By the final bell, Marcus knew. He could feel it in the way students lingered in the halls, phones ready again, waiting for the next moment. He could feel it in the way Thompson's gaze lingered, burning with the promise of retribution. Marcus had solved the problem. He had proven himself. But proof came with a cost, and as he pushed his cart down the quiet hallway, his footsteps echoing against the linoleum, he couldn't shake the truth pressing down on him. When you challenge prejudice, when you rise above the box they've built for you, The fight doesn't end with applause. It ends with backlash, and Marcus Reed was about to face it. The halls felt colder the next morning. The kind of cold that didn't come from the air vents but from eyes that lingered too long. Whispers followed Marcus like shadows, half admiration, half venom. The video of him solving the calculus problem had exploded across campus overnight. Students replayed it, shared it, turned him into a story, but in the teacher's lounge, it was a different story. Embarrassed the department, made a fool of a colleague, overstepped his place. Each word sharpened like a knife, though Marcus wasn't there to hear them. He didn't need to. He felt it in the way doors shut just a little too firmly, in the way teachers' voices hushed when he passed by. Respect wasn't what he had earned. He had exposed the cracks in their pride, and pride is dangerous when wounded. By the third day, Mr. Thompson struck back. It started with the board where Marcus's chalk marks had once stunned the class. Thompson now stood taller, louder, sharper in his lectures. He made jokes, barbs coated in humor but aimed directly at Marcus. Not every problem can be solved with a mop and bucket, he said once, drawing nervous laughter. Students shifted uncomfortably. Some laughed, some stayed silent, but the seed had been planted. Marcus's brilliance was an accident, a trick, something that would never last. Then came the whispers of cheating. Where had he learned calculus? Who was feeding him answers? How could a janitor possibly know more than a teacher? It wasn't curiosity. It was a campaign. One afternoon, Marcus was called into the principal's office. He walked in with quiet dignity, but his stomach tightened when he saw Thompson already seated, arms folded, eyes sharp with satisfaction. "Mr. Reed," the principal began, voice even, "there have been concerns." Concerns. The word carried more weight than accusation. Concerns meant doubt. Concerns meant suspicion. Thompson leaned forward, voice dripping with condescension. "We just want to ensure that academic integrity is upheld. It's highly unusual for someone without formal training to solve advanced problems so quickly. Naturally, questions have been raised." Marcus sat still, his hands folded, his expression calm, but inside his chest a storm raged. He wanted to scream, to ask why brilliance in black skin was always treated like theft, why his knowledge was never simply his own. But he knew better. One wrong word and the trap would spring shut. The principal's gaze softened slightly, almost apologetic. "Perhaps you could demonstrate again, prove beyond doubt that this wasn't coincidence." The challenge was clear. Prove yourself or lose everything. The next morning, word spread like wildfire. The janitor was being tested. Students crammed into the lecture hall, phones raised high. This time, Marcus wasn't walking into a prank. He was walking into a trial. On the board, Thompson wrote an even harder problem, dense, brutal, designed to trip him up. Chalk dust swirled in the sunlight as he stepped aside, arms crossed, daring Marcus to try. Marcus approached the board. His pulse thundered in his ears. He could feel the weight of 100 eyes, the smug certainty of Thompson's stare, the silent prayer of students hoping for justice but bracing for a fall. He picked up the chalk. The room held its breath. Step by step, he worked. His movements were slower this time, deliberate, each mark carved into silence. He could feel doubt crawling up his spine, feel Thompson's gaze boring into him. But with each line, the solution began to emerge, and then the final answer. Marcus placed the chalk down. The board was filled with proof, every step airtight. He turned, chest heaving, sweat prickling his forehead. The room exploded. Cheers, gasps, applause. Students leapt to their feet, phones recording the moment. History repeated itself. Marcus Reed had not only solved the problem, he had demolished the doubt. But not everyone cheered. Thompson's face was pale, his jaw clenched tight. He tried to speak, but the roar of the students drowned him out. His authority, his pride, his superiority, it had been shattered twice now, and this time in front of a crowd far larger than before. Marcus should have felt triumph. He should have felt vindicated. Instead, he felt the cold reality sink in deeper. The more he proved himself, the more dangerous the backlash would become, because this wasn't just about math. This was about power, and Marcus had just stripped a man of his power twice. As the crowd dispersed, the whispers returned, louder this time. Not of doubt, but of awe. Marcus was no longer invisible. He was unforgettable, and that made him a threat. That night, as he walked home under the dim streetlights, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that victory came with a cost he hadn't yet seen. Every step echoed with the same haunting thought: when you expose the truth, you don't just change minds, you make enemies. And Marcus Reed had just made the most dangerous one of all. The video didn't stop at the classroom walls. By the end of the week, Marcus Reed was no longer just a janitor. He was a headline, a trending clip, a story shared across social feeds with captions like "Genius Janitor Humbles Math Teacher" and "Don't Judge a Book by Its Cover." Students replayed the moment on loop. Some praised him, some mocked the teacher, some just shared it for the shock value. But to Marcus, the noise didn't matter. What mattered was what came after, the silence that returned when the applause faded. Because when the internet moves on, the people who remain behind don't forget. And Mr. Thompson didn't forget. The tension in the school halls thickened, invisible but suffocating. Colleagues who once ignored Marcus now watched him with guarded eyes, as if brilliance in his hands was dangerous. Teachers spoke less when he entered a room. Even some students shifted awkwardly, torn between admiration and the discomfort of seeing the hierarchy shaken. And yet something else had changed too. A boy approached him one afternoon, nervously clutching a notebook. His voice trembled when he spoke. "Mr. Reed, could you show me how you did it?" Then another came, and another. Soon, a handful of students lingered after classes, quietly seeking Marcus's help. They weren't laughing anymore. They were listening. For the first time, Marcus's knowledge was no longer a secret buried in notebooks at home. It was alive, shaping young minds who had seen the truth for themselves. But truth has a price. Rumors swirled that Thompson wanted Marcus gone, that he was petitioning the principal to have him transferred, that a man with no credentials had no place in the halls of learning, the same halls Marcus had just proven himself worthy of. Marcus felt the weight of it every day. The glances, the whispers, the subtle, sharpened edge of being tolerated but not accepted. He had shattered their expectations, but in doing so, he had broken an unspoken rule. Stay in your place. And yet Marcus refused to shrink back. He poured his energy into those who sought him out. He explained equations on scraps of paper, sketched solutions on lunch napkins, stayed late when students lingered with questions. He did what Thompson would not. He lifted others, instead of guarding knowledge like a crown. The contrast was undeniable. Students began to whisper a different truth now, that the janitor was a better teacher than the one with the chalkboard. That whisper became a quiet revolution. But outside the walls of that school, Marcus's story carried a deeper echo. People debated online. Was this a celebration of hidden genius, or proof of how deeply prejudice blinds us? Why did it take a viral video for brilliance in a black man's hands to be seen as real? For Marcus, the answer was clear. It wasn't about the math. It was about the world's refusal to see him until he forced them to. And that's the cruelty of it. The brilliance had always been there. The dignity had always been there. But until it disrupted someone else's pride, no one cared to look. The resolution didn't come with a promotion, or recognition, or even an apology from Thompson. No certificate appeared in his hands. No sudden acceptance washed over the staff who eyed him with quiet hostility. But resolution came in smaller, sharper ways. It came in the student who whispered, "You made me believe I could do this too." It came in the boy who said, "They laughed at you, but you proved them wrong." It came in the knowledge that his existence, his brilliance, his refusal to bend had left cracks in the walls of prejudice that others had built. And sometimes, those cracks are the beginning of something larger. Marcus walked the halls differently now, not with arrogance, but with a quiet defiance. The mop still in his hands, the cart still squeaking down the corridor, but the weight of invisibility had lifted. He was seen, not by all, not by those who clung to their pride, but by enough to matter. Because the truth is, stories like Marcus's aren't rare. They unfold quietly every day in classrooms, In workplaces, in neighborhoods where prejudice blinds people to the brilliance standing right in front of them. And that's the real impact of his story. It forces us to ask how. Many more Marcus Reeds walk among us unseen, dismissed, underestimated until someone tries to turn them into a joke. How many more lives will it take before we stop measuring worth by stereotypes and start seeing people for who they are? Marcus Reed may never wear the title of teacher, but in the eyes of those students who gathered around him, notebooks open, pencils ready, he already was one. And in the eyes of those who watched his story unfold, the question remains, burning long after the video ends. If brilliance can shine from the hands of a man holding a mop, what excuse do we have for not recognizing it sooner?